Hello YouTubers, thought I'd do a quick full disclosure update on the Turd-Bo 4.8 LS build. Even the best laid plans take a turn at some point. Basically, got the pistons and rods pulled out of the 4.8. I mean, they look worse than they really are because they got so much baked on oil. So don't let the wear pattern on the side of the skirt scare you too much. But once these things are cleaned up, they'll look fine. My concern is twofold. See if I can get the reflection. These rod journals, because I haven't pulled the crank out of the block yet, none of the rod journals have, let's use the term, phonographing. Like when you pull an engine apart and you fill your rod journals, you know, they'll have you run your fingernail across it. You know, can you catch any grooves? None of the rod journals, in my opinion, require turning 10 thousandths, but would definitely need to be polished. You know, there's a little bit of an oil buildup in between the rods, like on every engine you'll pull apart. I don't know if this camera's good enough to show it, but you can see what I call dirt lines, where people have run their oil way over the oil change suggested mileage. The viscosity breaks down and it puts that like fine, super fine scratchy finish on your journal, which if you wipe oil on there and make the journal wet, you can't even see them. You have to wipe all the oil off of the journal to even see. There they are. See those real super fine scratches? All 4 rod journals are like that. So at the very minimum, I'm going to have to pull the crank out and have the journals polished. Naturally, if you're going to polish the rod journals, you're going to do the mains too. But we'll cross the main journals. We'll do those whenever I pull the crank out and see exactly what they look like. So our throw it together and run at 4.8 has turned into at the bare minimum, polishing the crank and new set of bearings. Because I want to show you this bad spot on number 8. Number 8 rod bearing has a little tiny spot down to the copper. I mean, it barely hit the copper, but that's not good. If you look at that little wear spot, and you can see what I call dirt scratches, that's the embeddability of the surface of your bearing. You can see all that dirt's gone through this motor, which, you know, it's, look at this piston. I mean, as clean as it was in the valley and in the heads, who would have known this thing was so burnt up inside the cylinder and had these issues with the rod bearings? But, so our best laid plan of just gapping the rings and throwing it back together and running it, I'm going to be full disclosure with you guys, that's not going to happen because I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to pull this crank out. We're going to make a decision whether we're going to polish it ourselves or take it and have it done. I truly hate taking stuff to the machine shops because they're so sketchy nowadays. But, you know, back in the day, you could trust your machine shop guy. You know, you could take him parts and trust his opinion and hopefully, you know, get the same part you dropped off back, which apparently is no longer a common practice at the machine shop. So we'll pull it out, mic it up real good, maybe run over it with some 320. I've got several rolls of emery, crank polishing emery cloth, and I might run over it a little bit and just see what it looks like, mic it out and see, can we just chamfer the oil holes and polish it here? Because that'd be a good savings on the budget, because I'm still, trying to focus on building this thing as cheaply as possible. For anybody following the build, I do apologize. It was an unforeseen issue with these bearings, because I want to build a cheap motor. I want to build some good power on the cheap, but I absolutely do not want to assemble a time bomb, because it's just, I'm almost 48 years old and I don't feel like doing things multiple times to try to save a couple bucks. So, if you get into the bottom of a motor, you see wear on the bearings like I showed you on number 8, and you got a little bit of dirt scratches on your crank, go ahead and take the extra step, order another, new set of bearings. Well, you want to check your crank first, because just on the off chance that it's got to be turned, you got to match up your new bearings with your crank. I said, but that's cheap insurance to guarantee you'll have no problems in the future. Gosh, today's my wedding anniversary, so we're just kind of waiting around until we got to leave to go to the movies. So I just wanted to do a quick update with a full disclosure that the 4.8 Turd-Bo is still going to be on the low budget build, but is going to need some new bearings and probably some crankshaft polishing. Naturally, that brings up, just in case nobody's following, since I'm going to pull the crank and everything out of this block, I'm going to run a bore gauge through these bores, and if they're concentric, if they're round enough to support honing and re-ringing it, I'm just going to go ahead and bite the bullet and hone fit all these pistons and put new rings in it too. Again, I do apologize, because that was not in the original low dollar plan. Originally we were going to pull off the old rings, re-gap them to a turbo friendly gap, throw it back together and see what we could do. With the new changes in our game plan on the crank, because when you hone a cylinder, you have to wash the block. So now that I got to pull the crank and everything out and replace those bearings, it becomes a good option to go ahead and just put new fresh bearing or rings in it, as long as the bores are still round enough to support a new ring seal. It's come to my attention these LS motors have a hypereutectic piston from the factory. I will have to do some research, because I do not recall off the top of my head what kind of piston to cylinder wall clearance they recommend on a boosted application with hypereutectic pistons. I'm pretty sure it's going to be way tighter than a forged piston setup, but it may end up that I only need to break the glaze on these cylinders and run that. I haven't checked any of the piston cylinder wall clearances yet, but since so many people boost these engines to fairly high horsepower without really increasing the clearance on the piston, I'm pretty sure I should be able to get away with just breaking the glaze on all these and putting in a fresh set of rings, and we should be good to go. So anyway, I had posted on the Turd-Bo forums my concerns and findings in the short block. And of course, everybody mentioned, people want to mention, oh, you need to go ahead and just change it over to a 5.3. You know what? It's not in the budget. Like, if I'm going to stay with the Turd-Bo low budget, horsepower build, going out and getting a new rotating assembly to make this a 5.3 isn't really what we planned on doing. So I'm trying to ixnay that idea, because I do want to try to stay with the low budget. I don't want to go out and get a new 5.3 rotating assembly and build a max horsepower build. I want to see what we can do with this little 4.8 and try to stay focused on that idea. But just wanted to give you guys a little update on what we found pulling the pistons and rod assemblies out. Do apologize. I had no idea. As well as it looked up top, with only 110,000 on it, I really thought it would be in better shape in the bottom. And truly, it's not horrible, but I don't feel comfortable trying to throw it back together and just seeing how long it'll live. I don't like doing stuff like that. That gives you a bad name as an engine builder, and I don't want to do that. So anyway, that's where we're at on the 4.8. I intended to have the crank out by now, but every single time I think I'm going to come down and have time to work on it, this weekend has not worked out. So anyway, guys, keep watching. Hopefully you guys had a good Valentine's Day. Again, that's like my 18th wedding anniversary. Thank God for Valentine's Day. Hope you guys had a good time. Bye.